Pada V'Shalom from the evening of Yud Kislev Tafshin Lamed Tes. So this is the 40th anniversary coming up in 2 weeks of when the Rebbe said this Maimer. Generally, the Pada V'Shalom Maimarim are associated with Yud Tes Kislev. So the Pada V'Shalom Maimarim of the previous Rebbe's, the Rebbe. We think Yud Tes Kislev, the 19th of Kislev, which is the anniversary of the Alter Rebbe's release from prison. And there's a special connection between Pada V'Shalom and the Alter Rebbe's release from prison on Yud Tes Kislev, because the Alter Rebbe writes about his release. That he writes that when he read the verse Pada V'Shalom Nafshi, so he was Yotze V'Shalom Hashem Shalom. That when he was reading, when was he notified? When was he released from prison? As he was reading this verse, Pada V'Shalom Nafshi, which is in Tehillim chapter 55. Why was the Alter Rebbe reading that when he was, as he was being released? Because we know that we say Tehillim every day as it's divided according to the month. Tehillim, and every day we say another section of Tehillim corresponding to a different day of the month. And this is a practice that the Frierdiker Rebbe eventually made sort of public knowledge, but the Rebbes would always keep this practice. But in times of distress and challenges and difficulties, so they would also recite Tehillim as it's the week. That year that the Alter Rebbe was released from prison, Yud Tes Kislev, thank you. Yud Tes Kislev was on Tuesday, and Kapitel Nun Hey in Tehillim, Psalm 55 is in the section for Tuesday. So it was Tuesday the Alter Rebbe was reading that psalm, and as he was reading those words, he was released. And so Yud Tes Kislev Mamarim discuss and are based on this verse and explore obviously these themes and topics, the idea of freedom, the idea of redemption, and so on. Yud Kislev though is also connected to Pada V'Shalom, because Yud Kislev is the day of the liberation of the Mittel Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe's son and successor, and the Mittel Rebbe was released from prison, as we said, on Yud Kislev. And Yud Kislev, so there's obviously the natural connection to Pada, the idea of redeemed. But also, as the Rebbe explained, Pada V'Shalom is in the monthly cycle of Tehillim. Pada V'Shalom is, we say it every year on Yud Kislev. So Yud Tes Kislev, interestingly, not every year is Pada V'Shalom directly linked with Yud Tes Kislev. Depends if you're saying it for the day of the week and if it's on Tuesday. It's not always on Tuesday, but every year on Yud Kislev, because that's the section of Tehillim for Yud Kislev. So there's a connection with Pada V'Shalom Nafshi and Yud Kislev as well. Okay, so this is a mimer of Pada V'Shalom that's from Yud Kislev. There are some like that. Okay. So Pada V'Shalom. So this is from Motzei Shabbos Parshas Vayetze Tes Kislev or Yud Kislev Tafshin Lamed Tes. It's the same actually as this year. This is exactly 40 years ago. This year will be 40 years, and this year also we have Tes and Yud Kislev is the same Shabbos Sunday. Okay. The verse says that my soul was redeemed in peace from the battles against me because I was with many. Many were with me. So the Baal HaGeula, the person whose liberation we're celebrating on this day, Yud Kislev, meaning the Mittel Rebbe, Rabbi Dovber of Lubavitch. So he explains in his mimer by this title that's printed in his book Sharei Tshuva, that the Pirush Pada V'Shalom Dafka, the meaning of Pada V'Shalom. What does it mean that he was redeemed in peace? What does it mean in peace? This means that the adversary is completely nullified. So therefore, there's no requirement for war. Right? So when we say Pada V'Shalom, you can be redeemed, you can be released. You can either have a pre-dawn raid that catches people by surprise, where you release somebody from invade, and you can release somebody. There are ways to redeem somebody that's needs to be rescued. But when we say that the redemption happens in peace, so what does that mean? It means that there isn't even an adversary. What is this idea of peace, that there's no adversary? So he says, this is as it was in the days of Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, that all of the nations were completely nullified before Shlomo HaMelech without war. This is why one of the reasons why Shlomo was called Shlomo, Solomon was called by the name Shlomo, because in his day peace reigned. There was peace, and the name Shlomo is related to the word Shalom, which means peace. So we have like this: you have war, and you have peace. And then within war and peace, so you have different levels and different ways that you can overcome your enemy. So you have an enemy, and the way you overcome your enemy is you could fight, and you could completely subdue the enemy or suppress the enemy, and that is where you completely the enemy, right? You eliminate him. And then there's another level of peace, which is when you transform the enemy into a friend, where there's no longer, not only that you've eliminated the enemy, and not have when you suppress an enemy, so that you still have an enemy, still have an adversary, but you've just pushed them off, and now they're no longer harassing you or bothering you, because you've then there is eliminating the enemy, where you win a war that way, and then there is transforming the enemy, where the enemy becomes a friend, right? So in times of Shlomo, what did we have? We had peace. And how was there peace? Not through war. David HaMelech, Shlomo's father, King David, waged many battles. He fought many wars. There was always war, and there was always turbulence in his time. And he was obviously a very, very effective and mighty warrior. But he brought about peace through war. In the times of Shlomo, there was no war. It was a time of peace. That's why he's called Shlomo, because of peace. Let's look at note 4. So we'll see later in chapter 2 that really the higher level, the greatest of redemption through peace, when we say peace, we're talking about a level that's even higher than it was by Shlomo HaMelech, in the times of Shlomo. Also, what he says, so in other words, Shlomo's time, the enemy was completely nullified. Right, but you don't find that the enemy was transformed into a friend. There was no war, there was no tension, but the enemy still existed. There just wasn't a subdued through a repressed through war. But a higher level of peace, which we'll read later in chapter 2, is when he's totally transformed. So we say that he's called Shlomo because there was peace in his day, and it says in note 5, there's a verse in Divrei Hayam, Shlomo yiyeh shmoi v'shalom v'sheket etein al Yisrael b'yamav, that he'll be called Shlomo, Solomon, and I will provide peace. There will be peace and time for the Jewish people. Okay. So that's when we say that soul was redeemed in peace. What does peace mean? That there could be a redemption through war, there could be a redemption through peace, and this is what we're talking about, that there's redemption through peace. The Rebbe asks in Maimer, if you're in a situation where you don't have an enemy, so why do you need redemption? Why does your soul need to be redeemed if there's no enemy? Right? Redemption means you're being held captive, you're in danger, and you're rescued, you're redeemed. But if there's no enemy, if there's peace, so why do you need pada? Why do you need to be rescued? So the truth is, you could say, and I was rescued, and there's peace, just like you have a war. So sometimes you could have a war, and then the war somebody wins the war, and then there's peace, right? Or sometimes there's no peace, it's just an end to tensions, but there's not actual peace. And then there's sometimes a peace treaty that's signed, or whatever, you make peace, and now there's peace. So you say, Padav Shalom, my soul was redeemed from an enemy, and now there's Shalom, now there's peace. So what's the question? Explains what's asking Kipirish Padav Shalom who loisha Shalom bala achre apdi. The Mittler Rebbe's question is, he's asking, obviously you can have peace that comes after a war, after a rescue. But the question is, here, that there's that aspect where you have peace that comes afterwards, comes through war. After through war, and then comes Shalom. He says, no, and the way the Mittler Rebbe understands this verse in Tehillim is rescue was peaceful. It was a peaceful. The Pediyah was. So if rescue happens in peace, so then you don't need rescuing. So what does that mean? So that the Rebbe is explaining the question. In other words, you could learn that there was pada, through a rescue, then comes peace. But the Pediyah itself, the rescue itself, was peaceful. So if it was peaceful, so then, okay. So the Rebbe says you can add another question, and translate these two words. But the Rebbe says you keep looking, the question gets even stronger. What does the verse say? My soul was redeemed in peace, mikravli, from battles against me. Krav is battles, war. Is rescued from the fighting. The fact that this rescue comes from the that were waged against me. That's Rashi, how the Rashi understands this pasuk. That's how Rashi translates it. The simple meaning of the verse. So he pedia b'shalim. How is it possible when peace and war are two different things? You have peace and you have through waging war you can be rescued, and then there's peace that might come after. How could you say that the rescue happens peacefully, and at the same time there's the two things? Why do you need peace? Why do you need rescuing? So the verse itself is saying that there's a war going on. So if there's a war, so then where's the peace, right? So we have to understand this. Now, chapter 2, the Rebbe is going to make this question even bigger and say that the gap between war and peace is a lot, at least war as it's defined in this pasuk, and the peace that we're talking about in this pasuk are not just opposites or not just incompatible, but the polar opposites. So we can add to this question that these two things, this idea of Padav Shalom, peaceful rescue, and Mikravli, and war, they're not just two opposites. But they're two polar opposites. They're extreme opposites. Why is war called Krav? Right? We're saying Mikravli, war is called Krav. Why is war called Krav? Krav is Miloshin Kiruv. The word Krav, the word Krav means closeness, right? Like the word Kiruv. Kiruv means closeness. And we're calling war Krav. Or it's one of the words for war is Krav, which means close. So how could that be? War, closeness. So why, when we say in this verse, Mikravli, that refers to the wars against, David's referring to the wars against them as Krav. What war is he talking about? He could have said Milchama, whatever, to describe the enemy or the battles. Why does he use the word Krav? And opposite, Krav, which implies also the same word as the word closeness, seems to be the opposite of war. So what is he saying? So he says, who can move in my Maimer, as it seems apparent in the Maimer of the Middle Rebbe. Because there are many different types of war. And the worst kind of war is a war that is fought close, in close quarters. There are two types of wars to wage war. One is that you have the two enemies, the two adversaries are far away from each other. How? So then if they're far away from each other, how do they fight? They throw at each other arrows, they shoot arrows and catapult, cannons, stones. They throw these things at each other. That's a fight. Fighting from a distance, where you're shooting arrows and catapulting all kinds of stuff at your enemy. Another way of fighting is when you're fighting, you're hand-to-hand combat, you're very close. And there's closeness that happens through combat, but then there's and then you get to the point where you're wrestling with Yavik Ish Imoy, like we'd say by Yaakov, that in order to wrestle with somebody, you have to be not only close in proximity physically, but elegam begufam, but their body. When you're wrestling with somebody else, it looks as if you're hugging, racing each other. That's how you're fighting. The Muhammad Zu Tachlis Hakir war, the one that is the fought possible, the closest engagement, that's the worst kind of war. It says in note 9, we talked about Avnei Chitzim and Blistreis. That's when you throw things at each other, shots at each other, and cannons. But then there's fighting with a sword. So that's also close. You have to fight hand combat. But the Zeh Achiluk which is the difference between a sword and a bow. Later we're going to get into this idea of the wrestling. Then we're going to get that even fighting with a sword is not as close as fighting literally with your hands, where you're wrestling with each other. So that is the most brutal type of war, when you're literally entangled with each other. So that's with regard to war. When we say Pada v'Shalom nafshi mikrav, Melech is saying mikrav, he's referring to the war against him as a krav. That's the worst kind of war. That's the combat. That's literally where you're embracing each other and wrestling with each other. So the type of enemy he's referring to is the worst kind. It's the worst kind of war. But the same is true the other side. When we're talking about the pasuk Pada v'Shalom nafshi, was with shalom, with peace. So what type of peace? There are also levels of peace. The same is true on the other side. In our verse here, the is not regular peace. We're talking about the ultimate level of peace. As the Mittler Rebbe explains, as Maimer, that when we talk about peace, what's peace? The ultimate level we talk about peace, right? You can fight somebody. There's peace and quiet because you're no longer engaged in a fight. Then there's eliminating enemies, so there's no longer an enemy altogether. But then there's peace where the enemy becomes a friend. That's the ultimate form of peace, where there's not that there's no longer an enemy, but now you have another friend. You have somebody who's a supporter. And that's when we say shalom, peace, that's what we're talking about, that the enemy becomes, somebody who had first been an enemy, is nasim oivim gurim, to become absolute lover, which is even higher, that's even greater than the peace that was enjoyed during the days of Shleima. Right? The time of Shleima Melech, remember, think about it, Shleima Melech is the one who built the first Beis HaMikdash. His time, it describes Shlomo Melech's time as Kaima Sierra B'Shlomusa, right? The moon was full, meaning it was a time of great divine revelation. The greatest, most prosperous time in Jewish history was the time of King Shlomo. Therefore, because he was so great, Israel, the Jewish people, were at their height. There was peace, there's unity among the Jewish people. They had the temple, you had all the miracles in the Beis HaMikdash. So because of that, everybody was subdued to that. That awesomeness, that greatness, everybody wanted a part of it. But such great light that everybody was automatically, subdued. Because the Gilui, but they weren't transformed as a result. Then is the true peace when we're talking about the enemy being transformed. That'll be when Mashiach comes. We'll get that. Let's look at note. Peace that we're talking about, a level of peace in Melech is not spelled out clearly in Hemshech Chaim Beis. He does spell it out there, and the Rebbe says, based on this, we can see that the Mittler Rebbe, even though he doesn't clearly talk about it, but he does allude to it, because he says that it was similar in the time of Shlomo. Similar, not exactly. In the times of Shlomo, he didn't have the ultimate highest level of peace, of transformation of the enemy into a friend. When is that going to be? Mashiach comes. As the verse says, times of Mashiach, that at that time, in that day, and those transform the language, right? Everybody will speak, all the nations, everybody will be transformed to serve. It's not just that they will be subdued and awed by him and subdued to him and subservient to him, but they will actually be serving him. The same is true not just with regard to the nations. In other words, if we want to understand this idea of peace that'll be when Mashiach comes, how deep this idea of the transformation. Just even talking about humans, we're talking even about animals. About transformation, when you talk about humans, people are intellectual. So you have a great light of the time of redemption. In a sense, it could be so it'll be higher than Shem. They'll be serving Hashem. But we're talking about such a transformation that'll happen even in all aspects of creation. Like the verse says, "V'gar zevim keves gomer," right? The pasuk in Yeshaya that the wolf will lie with the lamb. The point that the pesen, the viper, and the serpent will all be transformed to good, because the in Yeshaya, so the verses say, he discusses the time of redemption. He says, "V'gar zevim keves," that the wolf will lie with the lamb, and then he talks about the child that will be at the nest of the viper, of the snake. So you have poisonous snakes that we run away from. And you have little babies playing at the So we see that the animals themselves also will be transformed. These mortal enemies that we know that are enemies today will coexist. They'll be together. And even the snake, which is man, the ultimate enemy of man, will be transformed. The verse says that also his enemies will come along with him, will make up with him, and so the Medrash explains that that's referring to who's Oivav, who's the enemy of man. That's the Nachash, the snake. Medrash says that before the Gemara says that before the sin of the tree of knowledge, so the snake, we know that the snake was the one who instigates that sin of the tree of knowledge. The snake is the one who talks to Chava, to Eve, and the snake talked and was walking on 2 feet. It was like Ansa-mensch. It was a whole. Why was the snake in that position? Because the snake at that time, as things were set up at the beginning of creation, the snake was supposed to be a butler. Supposed to help man. They were going to be man's assistant. That's how it was going to be. And instead, what happened? The snake turned and caused and instigated the sin. But the point is how it was initially, right? It was man's helper. Then through the sin, what happened? Snake becomes man's enemy. As it says that the snake and man are going to be enemies. But when Mashiach comes, so then even the snake is going to be transformed. And furthermore, the Rebbe says we could say that the kivan shekol yirida hitzarich aliyah, since every descent is for the purpose of a greater ascent that comes afterwards. So so the fact, the principle is that any descent, anytime you go down, it's all for the purpose of going higher up afterwards. So to say that the snake was man's helper initially, then the snake ends up being an enemy that's all just to get back to where it was originally. That's the whole thing. It's got to go higher, right? How's it go? So it has to go even higher than it was, right? And the Rebbe says in note 19, how do we reach a higher level in the times of Mashiach than it was initially? So he says, it's obvious from the fact that initially, meaning at the beginning of creation, even though at the beginning, at the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that the snake itself was a worthy servant of man, so still it was still possible for the snake to rebel, to turn against man, right? As whereas when Mashiach comes, there won't be that possibility. When Mashiach comes, there'll be a total transformation. There won't even be the possibility for turning against. Initially, the snake was Taka Shamash Gadol. He was subservient to man, but for it to turn against man. Then ultimately, but when Mashiach comes, it'll be transformed, and there won't be that possibility at all. So we see when we're talking about shalom, this idea of peace, what's the ultimate level of peace? The ultimate peace is the messianic ideal. When Mashiach comes, when we'll have ultimate peace, when enemies will become friends. V'gar zev and keves doesn't mean that the wolf won't. V'gar zev, they'll live together, they'll lie together, they'll become. Two things that were previously enemies of each other become friends. And the same is true with man and the snake. That snake will become a friend, and a friend in a way that was even greater than it was initially, a friend in a way that's not even possible to be betrayed. So all this only reinforces the initial question that he asked. The idea of Padav Shalom, a redemption through peace, and Mikravli from the battle. This verse is telling us Shalom is giving us peace of the Messiah. peace when two enemies. But Krav, the pasuk, is the worst form of war, right? As we talked about, the wrestling with each other. So how's it possible then that we get to from Krav? How do you get from one extreme to the other? How do we have these two extremes? True, but that, as we said originally, Pada V'Shalom means the redemption itself is with peace. It's not that there's a war and then there's... That's the problem. You understand? And we have two things here. We have the ultimate form of war and the ultimate form of peace. And we're saying that it's all... How do they all work together? We don't understand. We have some time to continue? Yeah, a couple minutes. Okay, chapter 3. We'll understand this. So we can understand this. That's the question. Suppose now we're going to here that the Mittler Rebbe explains in his Maimer that we're talking about the Pada V'Shalom from Shari Tshuva that these two things of war and peace are found in davening, the service of davening, prayer. Or the higher. So everyone notes that generally this there's a chiddush here, the Maimer, the Mitzvah can be found in davening peace. So they've been saying that generally that's not what we discuss. In Chassidus, usually what we talk about war is davening, or peace is Zohar says, Shas Tleisa, Shas Krava. Shas Tleisa, the time of davening is the time of Krav, of war. Right? So, generally, there are two different things. There's davening and there's learning. War and peace. And here, in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, he's talking about both of them within davening. So, that's what we're going to explore here. It's just like this. That generally, when we talk about the birur happens through davening is one through war. Shas Tleisa, Shas Krava, like the Zohar says, that the time of davening, time of prayer, is a time of war. Conflict. The transformation that happens through rest and through peace, that transformation that happens through study of Torah. In our verse, a Maimer, in the discourse of the Mittler that we're discussing, based on, he explains. So before we continue, what are we talking about? Birur b'derech milchama and birur b'derech menucha. The transformation happens through war. Transformation happens through peace. And how this? What are we saying here? He's talking about b'derech menucha shalom. What's going on? So this idea of birur, which means like sort of rectifying a transformation, transforming that happens. So there are two ways that can happen. It can happen through war and through peace. So the example that's generally given for this is you have a court case. So you have somebody comes to court, somebody's accused of a crime, and you have a prosecutor stands up in court and prosecutes and then makes an argument. The person is guilty of standing accused of. And so he brings. And then what happens? Then the defense attorney gets up, and the defense attorney defends. So what does he have to do? He has to reject all of the arguments set forth by the prosecutor. So the prosecutor makes one argument, and the defense a counter argument. And eventually, ultimately, the jury or the judge, somebody's going to have to come to a decision of whether this guy's. But that's a birur, meaning we're coming a clarification, transformation, some kind of clarity that we get to. There's a prosecutor that makes his case, and then there's a defender that makes his case, and they have to wrangle with each other. They have to tangle with each other to be able to come out to some kind of till we can find a verdict. The birur b'derech shalom. Then there's how you get to that through peace, and that is the way it's discussed. To the courtroom. This is ba'or pnei melachayim, that when the king shows up, the people that are condemned to death, and when the king comes, everybody's exonerated. Everybody goes free. There's no death. The king, the face of the king, that brings light. So what happens when the king walks into the courtroom? When the king walks into the courtroom, the prosecutor is quiet. He can't say anything. So in the first instance, the prosecutor makes his case, and the defense attorney has to listen to his case, and he has to understand what he's saying, and then he has to counter it. So the prosecutor has a lot to say, and he has to be countered. But in the king shows up, there's no countering the prosecutor. The prosecutor completely silenced. To put it in more modern terminology, a case that's going through the court system and going through, they can end up in the Supreme Court. It can be dragging through the court system for years and years with a couple of strokes of his pen. There's no argument. There's no discussion. Thing's over, right? So it's not exactly the same because commutation is not the same as exonerated with the king, but to get the idea. Point is that's something that happens without any kind of battling, without and intent. That's wrestling with each other and with ideas, and with that, it happens through peace. So the same is true we talk about Biru B'derech Menucha. Biru B'derech Menucha means that it comes automatically. There's no dealing with the adversary, but silence. And then there's B'derech Milchama through war, and that's where you have to deal with the adversary. And that's generally the difference between davening and learning. We'll continue this thought, God willing, next year. We'll continue at a time. So we'll continue this idea of why it's one davening is through war, is considered war, and learning is